Hi there, it's Designer Lily. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing the 3 universal design principles that I've learned over the years as a senior product designer in San Francisco. As someone who came from a visual arts background who pursued this in college, growing up, I was always obsessed with what makes things visually appealing, visually harmonious, and ultimately beautiful. And to the chagrin of my parents, I did pursue fine arts, and it worked out because now I'm working in Silicon Valley designing experiences for millions of users. Now, if you're watching this video, you're someone who's probably interested in design, whether that is professionally or as a hobby, or maybe you just want to develop an eye for the design aesthetics so that you can design better presentations at work. Well, if that's the case, then you're in the right place because I guarantee you, once you've learned these 3 universal design principles, you're going to be able to develop an eye for design and for visual harmony. Because everything you see, you're going to see these principles in place. Whether that is in the arts, which is really where this stems from, or looking at well-designed apps. Without further ado, let's get started. Here are the 3 universal design principles that I've observed over the years that are true regardless of the subject, format, or medium. Starting off with number 1 is balance. Have you ever looked at something beautiful and wondered why it looks harmonious? This could be a piece of art, it could be beautiful interior design, it could even be your iPhone. And the reason why something is harmonious is because there is some kind of intrinsic balance that is happening in place. And this attention to visual balance and what makes something aesthetic first came from the arts. So imagine there is a seesaw, and on the seesaw our objects are placed. They vary in size, weight, and distance. Now for this seesaw to be balanced, the objects have to be placed in a way that the seesaw will then be straight and even. This is an example of balance because, as you can see, even though these circles combined together are overall smaller in size than this circle, because this one is darker shading, this ends up balancing out. Now, if I change the position of this larger left circle towards the middle, this can still balance out if the circles on the end remain the same position but change in size and therefore weight. Now I'll show you an example of imbalanced. So we have the larger circle at the very end, but then we have a much smaller circle of the same weight, though different size, and the same distance at the very end. It's not enough to off-balance the large size of this circle, so therefore the seesaw is now imbalanced. Here's another example of imbalanced, in which we have circles of the same size and weight, and because this one is in a different position at the very end, and this one is towards the middle, the seesaw is now imbalanced. The only way that this would be balanced is if this circle was placed in the very end, since they are equal size and weight. Now let's see real-world examples of the seesaw at play. We know this famous piece, The Creation of Adam by Michelangelo, in which it's very obvious that there are 2 large objects, basically large circles, that are equal distance from each other, and therefore this piece looks balanced because both sides are relatively the same in size, weight, and distance from one another. Here are more complex examples. We have the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, who pioneered the portrait style painting, and we have The Scream by Edvard Munch. This is less obvious in terms of how the seesaw works, but I'll explain. For the Mona Lisa, the subject is in the middle of the seesaw with objects in the very back, far away, that have a lot of detail, therefore a lot of weight. We have The Scream, in which we have the subject in the very middle, but it is balanced because there are 2 heavier weighted characters in the back. And if you notice, the sky itself also has this balance principle, in which there is a lot of weight here, but there's also a lot of weight here. Because this is lighter, you can see there is more mass, and we also have this bridge, and because this is darkly shaded, it is heavier per se, but it is smaller in size. It balances each other out. For the Mona Lisa on a seesaw, you can see the women in the middle, as I mentioned before, and the background being extremely detailed and quite far from the subject itself. They're placed at the very end of the seesaw, and because they're very detailed, they're heavier in weight. A little fun fact among the art community is that the Mona Lisa is not only well known for the smile, but also for how incredibly detailed the background is. The background of the Mona Lisa itself is a subject of study in itself. Now for the screen, in regards to the subject itself, we have the ghost apparition in the middle, and we have the two darker figures that are much further in the background, at the very edge of the canvas. And therefore, because of the shading, the weight, as well as the distance from this main ghost-like figure as the main subject, the seesaw balances out. We see this example in not just art, but also objects like playing cards. For playing cards, we have an object in the left corner, and then usually two detailed or more objects at the very top right. Now, if we were to move these two details to the top left, it feels unbalanced because there is a lot of space here with no weight in it, and everything of weight is put on the left side of the canvas for the seesaw. If we look at a mobile screen, for example, for reading text, you can see on the left side, it feels balanced out because we have something of heavier weight at the top, medium-ish weight and the lighter weight in the middle, and then the photo, usually the heavier weight at the very bottom. Now, if we were to put the larger and heavier items on one side and stack them together, you can see that the rest of the canvas feels empty and imbalanced and a lot lighter because all the visual weight has been concentrated at the top. Lastly, tying this into UI. If you look at your phone, you'll notice often that there is UI laid out like this, in which there is an image or illustration, then we have some text, and then two CTAs, with one being primary, and then some kind of navigation tab at the bottom. And if we were to change this order and stack everything of visual weight at the very top, putting the text at the bottom, you can see it feels off. And that's why this is a universal design layout. The second principle is hierarchy. Let's imagine we are time traveling back to the 90s. Take a look at Amazon in the 90s and today. What is the difference that you see? And yes, it feels harder to decipher for some reason, right? It feels like your eye doesn't know where it's going. Now, what reason could that be? Look at Airbnb. The same thing happens, in which it just feels clunkier. It just feels harder to navigate visually for some reason, right? Even though today Airbnb has more elements to click on than it had previously. Now I'm going to give you one more example, and this time squint your eyes. What do you see different? If you were to squint your eyes, you probably will notice something like this. The weight of everything, the page in the 90s, feels about the same. Versus today, there seems to be a lot more of a hierarchy in terms of where your eyes should be focusing on. So what changed from the 90s until today? Well, a little bit of a history lesson here, and this is one of the main factors, is that design advanced as a field, and therefore people started to specialize in design. Before, in the 90s, user experience was designed by engineers, and they tended to put all the functions that you could do on a page of equal value to each other, meaning that they would just put all the links you see, and basically it was up to you as a user to prioritize what functions you wanted to visit. Fast forward to today, you'll notice that all the mainstream products or apps, designers generally follow the 20/80 principle, in which they design the page to account for the fact that users use 20% of the functions on a page 80% of the time. And that's why you see a further emphasis on certain sections, instead of everything feeling relatively of equal value. This is true for eBay. As you can see, there's a lot of emphasis on the search and recently searched items. This is true for Airbnb. As you can see, there's a lot of emphasis on looking at beautiful listings as well as searching yourself. This is also true for Amazon, in which your recently viewed items for shopping are the main focus of this page. All of this is to say that designers have to establish some kind of hierarchy on a page, because if it's intentional or not intentional, there is a hierarchy in place. And we would rather have an intentional hierarchy in which we're able to prioritize functions or prioritize important elements for the user to focus on, rather than them having to navigate and figure it out themselves. This is true for everything from well-designed posters, well-designed maps, well-designed architecture, to now well-designed user experiences. The last principle is detail. The detail make the design. And here's what I mean. This is something that I slapped together without paying too much attention to the details of the elements. And on the right, I adjusted the details of the text, of the kerning, of the photo, of the entire layout itself. And for some reason, you can probably also feel that the right one feels a lot more right. At a quick glance, it's hard to tell what the difference between these two designs are, I'm willing to bet that if I took these designs and showed to 1,000 people and asked them to make a quick snap judgment in 3 seconds of which design looks better, the vast majority would choose the version on the right as better looking. They may not be able to articulate why the right side looks better, but that is part of the visible work that goes into design, is that you are iterating all these small details that most people not in your field would consciously not be able to detect. But all these small details that you're sweating hours of work in is what ultimately makes the product so much better. And this is true in music when people are designing songs in which the sounds are so similar that a normal person can't even tell the difference, to how something is built, for example Apple, in which that 1 millimeter maybe doesn't make that big of a difference to the average eye, but all these small details over time make a beautiful product that has the perfect bezel curve. This is another example using UI. You would probably think when you're looking at the YouTube search banner that these are all the same shade of black, but upon closer inspection though, the search bar fill itself is slightly lighter than the rest of the YouTube banner, and this makes it more accessible as well as brings it forward so that your eye can more easily track the search bar, and the CTA of course is also a lighter color, making it easier for your eye to track and click. If we even look at design that is supposed to be effortless, something like the album cover Brand by Charlie XCX, it feels like a designer literally opened up Windows, typed these words, and then slapped it on an album cover. That's what it feels like. But the fact is that effortlessness was intentionally designed with sweat, blood, and tears. And if you read the interview of the album cover designer themselves, they actually stated that they spent 5 months designing this album cover over hundreds and hundreds of iterations with different font pairings, different colors, different adjustments of the type itself before landing to this iconic Brat logo on a lime green cover. This was not something that was carelessly designed. In fact, it's the opposite, in which every detail is meticulously iterated until it feels effortless. And even looking at the deluxe cover of the album itself, it feels like someone just threw this together on an old version of Word. But if you look at the details, you'll notice that the space has been manually adjusted, in which somehow all the words magically fit within the row. And that's not by accident. So next time you look at anything that is visually appealing or attracts your eye and it feels effortless, just know that what makes it seem simple or intuitive or common sense is in fact some designer sweating hours and hours of work into the very small details, even the spacing between the text. So to review, here are the 3 universal principles that are transcendent of time, subject, and medium, in my opinion, as a designer with an arts background. Now I'm going to focus on these 3 takeaways for designers. The first one being balance, and we can achieve this by imagining the visual weight of our work on a seesaw. The second principle is to determine an intentional hierarchy, because whether you design one or not, there's going to be a hierarchy, so you might as well design one that prioritizes the most important functions or elements for your audience. The third principle is details make the design. So if you are someone who cares about craft and you want to become better at craft, then you have to sweat the details, because the details are what ultimately makes everything come together. The last principle is the details make the design. So if you care about craft, then you have to care about the details. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have learned something meaningful and helpful for your next project or work. If you would like to see more design content like this, then please hit that subscribe button and notification bell, and I'll see you next time. Take care.